Italy shut down its streets for Alex Eala, and nobody saw it coming. The moment she stepped off that plane in Rome, everything stopped. Fans flooded the avenues, flags waved, chants erupted in a language she barely speaks, yet somehow every single word was for her. This wasn't just an athlete arriving for a tennis tournament. This was a coronation. And before this video ends, you'll understand exactly why Italy didn't just welcome Alex Eala, they surrendered to her. There's a particular weight that settles on the shoulders of a young athlete when she stops competing just for herself, when every match she plays, every flight she boards, every city she enters carries the silent hopes of 115 million people watching from an ocean away. Alex Eala has carried that weight since the moment she first held a professional racket. Born in Manila, shaped in Barcelona under the Rafael Nadal Academy, and launched into the world stage before most young women her age had figured out what they wanted for breakfast, Eala's trajectory defies every conventional metric of tennis development. She did not come from a nation with a storied Grand Slam lineage. She did not inherit a system built for champions. She built one, brick by brick, loss by loss, until the world had no choice but to take notice. But Rome? Rome was different. The Foro Italico, nestled along the banks of the Tiber River, draped in the golden warmth of an Italian spring, this is hallowed ground. This is where Serena Williams screamed in triumph and Rafael Nadal turned clay into legend. This is a stage that has swallowed careers whole and spit out warriors. And Eala was walking straight into it. What made this particular arrival so electric wasn't simply the tennis, it was the timing. Coming off a run of results that had turned skeptics into believers, Eala arrived in Rome not as an underdog seeking validation, but as a young force demanding recognition. The WTA rankings told one story, the crowds told another. Because when word spread through Rome's tennis corridors that Alex Eala's motorcade was approaching, something extraordinary happened. People moved, not toward the venue, toward the streets. Journalists stationed near the Piazza del Popolo reported clusters of fans gathering hours before her scheduled arrival. Filipino diaspora members who had flown from Milan, Naples, and Frankfurt, many holding handmade signs written in Tagalog. Italian tennis devotees who had watched her viral match clips enough times to recite her stroke mechanics from memory, even locals who had never followed WTA tennis beyond the Italian Open headlines found themselves drawn into the orbit of this moment. Something about Eala, the way she carries herself, the quiet ferocity behind those eyes, and the smile that somehow communicates both humility and absolute belief, translates across every language barrier. And when the convoy finally appeared, the sound that rose from those Roman streets was not polite applause. It was a roar. Still here? Good, because what happened next on those Italian streets broke the internet in ways nobody predicted. The footage, captured on dozens of phones and streamed simultaneously across multiple platforms, looked more like a scene from a state visit than a sporting arrival. Barricades lined both sides of the approach road to the Foro Italico. Carabinieri officers stood at measured intervals, and between those barriers, people. Thousands of them, pressed shoulder to shoulder, arms outstretched, voices already rising before the vehicle even came to a complete stop. When that door opened and Alex Eala stepped out, dressed simply, carrying herself with that particular stillness that separates athletes who are nervous from athletes who are ready, the noise reached a register that one bystander described online as physical. You could feel it. She paused at the edge of the vehicle, looked left, then right, took in the sea of faces, the flags, the signs, and then she did something that the cameras captured in exquisite detail. She pressed her hand to her chest. Not a wave, not a rehearsed celebrity gesture, a genuine moment of disbelief. "I did not expect this," she would later say, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "I've played in big venues. I've had moments where the crowd was loud. But this was different. This felt like love." Social media shattered immediately. The clip of her pressing her hand to her chest was shared over 2 million times within the first 6 hours. Filipino media had it on every major broadcast before the sun had fully set in Manila. Italian sports journalists who had covered the Rome Open for decades admitted with some surprise that they had never witnessed an arrival quite like it for a player ranked outside the top 10. But rankings, as Rome was demonstrating in real time, mean very little when a story has captured the world's imagination. Because Alex Eala isn't just a tennis player to the people who follow her. She represents something harder to quantify than a number next to a name. She represents the audacity of imagining yourself in spaces where people who look like you have historically not been present. She represents the specific Filipino concept of descarte, resourcefulness, resilience, and the refusal to be defined by circumstance. And Italy, a nation that understands deeply what it means to revere both artistry and suffering, recognized it immediately. Tournament director Adriano Panada was among the first officials to greet her. Speaking briefly to reporters afterwards, he acknowledged that the scale of the reception had genuinely surprised even the event's organizing committee. "We prepared for a significant arrival. We did not prepare for this." Streets that had seen Steffi Graf, that had seen Martina Navratilova, Monica Seles, Justine Henin. Streets that carry the footsteps of tennis royalty, completely shut down. For a 20-year-old from Manila. Don't go anywhere, because the moment inside the tournament grounds made the street reception look like just the beginning. In the days following that first-round victory, something shifted in the tone of the conversation surrounding Eala's presence in Rome. The initial coverage, which had focused heavily on the spectacle of her arrival, the shut-down streets, the sea of flags, began evolving into something more substantive. Analysts and former players began examining her tennis with the seriousness typically reserved for established stars. WTA commentators who had previously framed her career in the cautious language of potential began speaking in the more definitive vocabulary of achievement. This linguistic shift matters. In the ecosystem of professional sports media, being discussed differently means being treated differently by the competitive environment around you. Opponents begin preparing more thoroughly. Tournament seedings reflect updated calculations. Sponsorship conversations, always tracking ahead of rankings, begin in earnest. Rome was quietly recalibrating its assessment of Alex Eala. But something else was happening simultaneously, something that transcended tennis and entered the territory that sport occasionally, gloriously enters when an athlete becomes a symbol. The Philippine government sports agency released a formal statement acknowledging Eala's Rome reception. Former athletes, politicians, and cultural figures across Southeast Asia began adding their voices to a chorus that framed her progress not merely as an individual achievement, but as collective evidence, proof that geography of origin does not determine ceiling of achievement. In Rome's Filipino diaspora community centers that had been quietly monitoring her matches now became impromptu viewing parties. Families who had left the Philippines for Italy 10, 15, 20 years earlier for economic reasons, for opportunity, for all the complex motivations that drive human migration, found in Eala's presence at the Foro Italico a particular resonance. One community organizer, speaking to a local publication, articulated it precisely. When she walks onto that court, she carries all of us, not as a burden, as a privilege. This is the specific alchemy that transforms athletes into icons. It requires technical excellence, certainly, but it also requires timing, context, and a quality of presence that allows others to see themselves reflected in your effort. Eala possesses all three. Her coach, navigating the complicated balance of protecting a young player from the distorting effects of premature mytholizing, while also acknowledging the genuine significance of what was unfolding, spoke carefully but pointedly to reporters. Alex understands what this means beyond tennis, he noted. she also understands that the best way to honor the people who have embraced her here is to keep competing at the highest level she can. The courts don't care about reception committees. The racket doesn't know about the streets being shut down. True. And also, those streets, that noise, that roar, those 2 million shared clips, they don't just disappear into the ether. They become the foundation of something, a legacy, still being written on Roman clay. Because here's what Italy recognized before most of the tennis world admitted it. Alex Eala isn't coming. She's already here. Years from now, when the record books have registered whatever results this Rome Open eventually produces, when the final scores are archived and the draw sheets are filed away, something will remain that no scoreline can fully capture. What happened when Alex Eala arrived in Rome was not simply a tennis event, it was a cultural document. It recorded, in the unmistakable language of human bodies pressed together in public streets, of flags raised above unfamiliar skylines, of voices calling a name across a city that learned to pronounce it only recently, that sport still retains the capacity to fracture the ordinary, to make geography feel insufficient as a concept, to suggest, compellingly, that belonging is not inherited but earned. Eala's journey to this moment carries within it the specific texture of an era, of a generation that built communities across platforms before building them in person, that found solidarity in shared viewing experiences and comment sections, that transferred the loyalties once reserved for hometown heroes onto athletes discovered through a 60-second video clip. This generation watched her lose matches they believed she should have won. They watched her press conferences, where she speaks with a precision and emotional intelligence unusual in someone her age. They watched her practice reels, her warm-up rituals, the particular way she walks to the baseline, unhurried, deliberate, certain. And then they booked flights to Rome. The Foro Italico has welcomed champions before. It has staged upsets and coronations and slow-burning collapses. It has been the venue where legends confirmed themselves and pretenders were quietly dismissed. What it had not witnessed, at least not in recent memory, was this particular phenomenon: the arrival of an athlete whose significance to her audience preceded and, in certain ways, exceeded her ranking. That's not a criticism, it's a recognition of something real. Because sport, at its finest, is never only about who wins. It is about who means something, about who carries a story inside their performance that others can locate within their own lives, about whose effort, whose struggle, whose craft becomes a mirror for something we recognize in ourselves. Alex Eala stepping through those Roman streets while an entire city held its breath, she was that for those people on that day. And whatever happens next, whatever the trajectory of her career brings, whatever Grand Slam chapters have yet to be opened, whatever records remain unbroken before her name appears beneath them, she will have already given those crowds something permanent: the memory of a morning when Rome shut down, when flags flew in 2 languages, when a 20-year-old from Manila walked through adoration with her hand pressed to her chest, not in performance, but in genuine, overwhelmed recognition of the weight of being loved by strangers. Was this simply the welcome of a promising young tennis player, or was it the beginning of a legacy that will outlast every score ever recorded on those Roman courts? Drop your answer in the comments, and if this story moved you even a fraction of the way it moved those Roman streets, you already know what to do. Subscribe, because this story is only getting started.